Once upon a time, in the busy city of Lagos, lived a very happy married couple called Daniel and Olivet. They were so in love and had good paying jobs. They had everything money could buy, but their happiness wasn't complete because they have been married for 7 good years and they are yet to have a child of their own. Olivet had cried, prayed, and fasted. She has visited several doctors, and all the result they got was that they were okay and will have children at the right time. After 7 years of childlessness, God finally blessed them with a bouncing baby boy, and they called him Derek. Mr. Daniel was so happy that he couldn't stop doting on his son. He bought lots of gifts and kid toys for his son, even the things that were not needed. The love he had for his son was so much that the boy was not allowed to stay alone in his room. He was sleeping with his parents, even at the age of 5. One day, after they had retired to bed, Derek was lying down in between the couples, and Mr. Daniel kept staring at his son. "Why are you staring at your son like that?" Olivet asked her husband. "My dear," he said, "I never thought we would become parents. Don't you remember all we went through?" Mr. Daniel said, and his wife replied, "How can I ever forget? I was the one that was being called a barren woman. I was mocked for 7 good years. I got different advice from different friends, pastors, and even your mother advised me to quit my job and rest at home. Maybe my body will carry a baby." Different doctors had different things to say. Each time we visited them, people pointed fingers at me when I walked past them. Even some women in my church make mockery of me. I cried my eyes out after a fellow woman told me that I was wombless. So therefore, I am now a man. That is why I couldn't give my husband children. I had to quit my job and start staying at home. Olivet said all this with tears rolling down her cheek. "It's okay, my wife. That is all in the past now. God has given us Derek and has blessed us with a healthy son," Mr. Daniel said with a smile. "My dear husband, our son's birthday is coming up very soon, and we have to make lots of preparations." And Daniel replied, "Of course we're going to celebrate it in a grand style. It is not easy to have waited all these years and been blessed with a son." Mr. Daniel stretched his hand and turned off the light and kissed his son and wife goodnight. The next morning, Mr. Daniel carried Derek to school and was supposed to pick him up, but he was swamped at work that he forgot that it was time to pick up Derek from school. Olivet couldn't pick him up because her car was faulty, as Daniel has assured her that he was going to pick their son up from school. 40 minutes after the school dismissal, Mr. Daniel was yet to pick Derek. Olivet was a little worried, but decided to wait a little bit longer, thinking that maybe they were stuck in traffic. After a few more minutes, she decided to call her husband. Mr. Daniel was shocked that it was already past almost an hour since his son's school dismissed. He pleaded with his wife to quickly use the bus and go and pick his son because he was still very busy at work. Olivet left what she was doing immediately and started heading to Derek's school. It was already 55 minutes late, and it will take another 15 minutes to get to the boys' school. She entered a bus after a 5-minute drive. They got stuck in traffic. The traffic was so bad that she had to drop and search for a bike that will be faster because the bike riders always have a way of maneuvering the traffic. After walking in a haste for a few minutes, she stopped a bike and tried to climb the bike. Then she remembered she had forgotten her purse in the bus she entered earlier. She didn't know if she was supposed to continue her journey or go back to get her purse. She asked the bikeman to go while she went back to get her purse in a haste. Her phone was inside the bag, so she walked quickly in order to meet the bus that she had entered. Meanwhile, back at school, Derek sat outside with some of his classmates who were also waiting for their parents to come and pick them up. Those who had elder siblings went home with them, as parents kept coming into the school in numbers. Derek sat down wondering what was keeping his father and if his father had forgotten to pick him up. "Derek, is your father not coming today?" one of his classmates asked him as she was about to leave with her mother. Derek was already tired of waiting. He was so hungry and tired that he decided to take matters into his own hand. Derek stood up and decided to go home alone. He left the school with his bag and lunchbox. He started walking home alone while carrying his lunchbox and crying. After a few minutes walk, his lunchbox fell from his hand and rolled into the main road. He tried to pick it up without looking at the road. A woman saw him and tried calling out to Derek because of the speeding car coming towards him. The man driving the car quickly stepped on his brake, but it was already too late. He had knocked Derek down. The man came down immediately and saw Derek lying down almost lifeless and bleeding. Before people could come any closer, the man carried Derek into his car and sped off to the hospital in a haste. While walking back in quick steps to where she had dropped from the bus earlier, she noticed some buses diverting to another direction to follow another route because of the traffic ahead. She increased her pace to find the bus she had come down from earlier, but she couldn't identify the bus. It looked like the bus had turned around with the others. Olivet carried her hand on her head in confusion. She had just lost her handbag containing her phones. She wanted to call her husband, but she couldn't because she couldn't even pay for a bike. She had no money on her, so she decided to trek down to the school and then call her husband with one of the teacher's phone. When she got to the school after so many minutes of walking under the scorching sun, she arrived in front of the school gate. She was sweating profusely like someone who had engaged in a marathon. The environment was very quiet, unlike the usual time when kids were around the vicinity. Olivet's only hope was that her son was inside the gate, seeing that there was no padlock on it. As she reached out to open the gate, she saw the headmistress coming out of the gate holding a padlock, about to close the gate. "Good afternoon, ma," she greeted, trying to force a smile. "Good afternoon, my dear. Why are you sweating so much?" the headmistress asked, looking at Olivet. "I am sorry I am so late. It seems everyone has left already," asked Olivet, looking around. "Yes, it's already 4 p.m. and everybody has left. Today is Friday and we close early," the headmistress answered. "Okay, what about my son?" Olivet asked, fixing her gaze on the headmistress as she locked up the gate. "Your son? No one is in here. Why not call your husband and know if he was here to pick him up?" the headmistress answered. I know my husband too well, and he can't ask me to come and pick up my son from school if he has already done that," Olivet said, already having mixed feelings. "Why not call him?" the headmistress suggested. "That's the problem. I can't. I was in a hurry and forgot my handbag with my phone inside the bus I entered earlier. When there was traffic, my phone and the little money I had on me is all gone. I just wanted to come and pick up my son first before I start talking about my phone." "Then how did you pay the bus when you came down?" "I had money on my hand already and I just..." "Oh ma, please, that is not my problem. My problem is, where is my son?" Olivet was already having a bad feeling. "Take my phone and call your husband. Let's see if he picked your son up," the headmistress said, dipping her hand into her handbag and bringing out her phone. She gave it to Olivet, who collected it and dialed her husband's number. Immediately, her husband picked up the call and asked, "I have been trying to reach you. What happened?" Oliver asked him if he had come to the school to pick up the boy. He said he was still at work and that was why he tried calling her severally, but she wasn't picking her calls. I wanted to know if you were back home. Mr. Daniel couldn't understand what she was saying. That his prince was missing. I am coming over there immediately, Mr. Daniel said, hanging up the phone. And Olivet could feel tears building up in her eyes. Where is my son? Olivet asked the headmistress. The headmistress was dumbfounded. She had no answer to the question Olivet just asked her. Calm down, Miss Olivet. Calm down. Let me call the teacher in charge of Derek's class. She asked the teacher to come back to school as there was a case of a missing pupil. Oliver didn't know where she would start from to look for her missing son. As tears rolled down her eyes, as she waited for the teacher in charge of Derek's class to come, she was restless and she just kept looking around, hoping to lay her eyes on her son. It took a few minutes and the teacher came back to the school. She was about to ask who had taken Derek. Then the teacher said she saw Derek sitting down with his friend Anthony outside waiting for his father. I saw Anthony's mother coming to take Anthony. After a while, I didn't see Derek anymore. I thought his father had picked him, the teacher said to Oliver. And Olivet replied, please call Anthony's mother on the phone and find out if Derek had followed them home, she said. The teacher brought out her phone and looked on Anthony's mother's number. When Mr. Daniel came down from the bike and walked towards them in a quick pace, a call came into the headmistress' phone. She picked it up. Hello, madam. I think one of your students met with an accident few minutes ago, the voice said over the phone. The headmistress shifted a bit where she couldn't be heard. She asked, please, can you give me a description of the pupil? When she got the description, it fitted that of Derek. After the call, she didn't know how she was going to tell the couples that their only son had been involved in a life-threatening accident. To make matters worse, she had no idea where he was carried off to by the man who had knocked him down. The headmistress just kept staring at Daniel, who was consoling his wife, who was crying bitterly. Anthony's mother then told the teacher that Daniel wasn't with her. With the news, the teacher almost broke out in tears. The teacher and the headmistress sat in confusion and pity for the couples, who did not know how to break the news. Earlier, when Derek was hit by a speeding car, the man who had knocked him down came down from his car immediately and saw Derek lying almost lifeless. And without wasting much time, he carried the boy into his car and drove off in a haste, praying so hard that the boy shouldn't die before he gets to the hospital. Mr. Solomon was on the phone talking with his wife. He had actually come for a visit and was going back to his city. He didn't see the boy. He was lost in the call he was making. He only heard someone shout loudly. That was what drew his attention. But before he could step on the brakes, he had already knocked down the little boy. So he immediately came down and carried Daniel back into his car. He didn't want to take any chances in saving the life of the little boy. What kind of temptation is this? Mr. Solomon asked himself as he quickly drove to the hospital. He knew that was no distance away from him. He was sweating profusely as he drove at a maximum speed. When he got to the hospital, he carried Derek into the hospital. He was already bleeding from his nose and his head. It seems like Derek's head had landed on the iron in front of the jeep without falling on the ground. The nurse took charge immediately. The doctor was busy with another patient when he was told of the emergency. He quickly came to see the little patient. Solomon was pacing around the hospital. He didn't know what to do. The doctor was really taking quite long inside the theater room. And Solomon grew anxious by the moment. He didn't want to hear any bad news. The doctor came out with a sad look. Solomon walked up to him and asked him what's doing, how the little boy was doing. The doctor looked at Solomon and shook his head. I am sorry, sir, but the accident was really fatal. We examined him thoroughly and found that he had internal brain bleeding. We have tried to control it with drugs and injections. He needs immediate surgery for him to survive. The doctor said, "Okay, go ahead with the surgery, doctor. The money won't be a problem. I will sign any required necessary documents. I don't want that little boy to die. Please, doctor," Solomon begged, with his hands together. "I am sorry, but we don't have the necessary equipment here. You will have to take him to another hospital. I will give you some written notes. But Solomon is just new in town and he didn't know his way around. Which hospital was he going to take the boy to for a needed surgery? So he decided to take Derek to his city. He needed him to get better before looking for who his parents were. When Solomon asked the doctor if Derek could on for a 4 to 5 hours drive to another and an equipped hospital from where he came from, the doctor gave his approval and gave some written note to Solomon and gave the boy another injection. Back at Derry school, the headmistress called out softly to Mr. Daniel, and they both stood up immediately, turned to see why the headmistress was calling. "I just got a call. Your son Derek was involved in an accident." "My son was involved in an accident? Where? When? How did it happen?" Olivet ran and held the headmistress, asking her impatiently. "Few minutes down the street," the headmistress answered. Olivet ran off immediately towards where she was shown, without waiting for the rest. Mr. Daniel immediately followed his running wife towards the accident scene. When they got there, they were told that the man who had knocked him down had taken him. Maybe he had taken him to. Since no one knew which hospital Daniel was taken to, the teacher and the headmistress stopped a taxi and left for the closest hospital in the taxi. Mr. Daniel wanted to shout at the headmistress, but he knew it was all his fault. Olivet held her husband tightly, hoping for her son to be in the hospital, as streams of tears rolled down her cheek. Both the teacher and the headmistress also hoped that Daniel will be fine and in a good condition. When they got to the hospital, Olivet was the first to run into the hospital. She asked the nurses if they had seen a little boy in school uniform who got into an accident. The nurses checked their list and there was no record of a boy involved in an accident. Olivet was disappointed, but she still moved on to the next hospital. By the time they got to the third hospital and asked about the case of a little boy who had an accident, they were told that the little boy who fitted their description was brought into the hospital. It was a big hospital, so they were asked to wait while they find which ward the boy was taken into. Olivet was relieved that finally she was going to see her only son. She only hoped that Derek was okay. They all waited impatiently for someone to come and take them to see Derek. Then the doctor came out. He came to see those looking for the little boy. "Doctor, how is my son? Where is he? Can I see him?" The doctor was taken aback and watched the tears in Olivet's eyes. "Please, can we see our son?" That was when the doctor realized that those people standing in front of him were the parents of the boy. "I am so sorry. Are you the parents of the little boy?" the doctor asked, shifting his gaze from Olivet to Mr. Daniel. "Yes, we are," they both answered anxiously and nodding their head. "Sorry to break this sadness to you then. Your son was involved in a serious accident which nearly took his life. When he was rushed in here, he was bleeding from his head. I had thought that was all, so I decided to examine him further, and I found out that he had an internal brain bleeding." "My son had an internal brain bleeding? Okay, so where is my son?" "I want to see him, please," Olivet asked with tears rolling down her cheek. The doctor sighed a heavy sigh and continued. "Ma, he needed to be operated to stop the bleeding completely. I had given him some drugs and injections to keep the blood from flowing in. Our hospital doesn't have the necessary equipment, for the surgery, so the man who brought him in here decided to take the boy to a big city so that he can be treated. Which city? Which city, doctor? Do you have his number? I don't know the city he lives in, neither do I have his number, the doctor said in a disappointing tone. Oliver turned slowly, looked at her husband, and then fell and fainted. They tried immediately to revive her in the hospital. When Olivet woke up, all she did was cry bitterly, asking for her only child. Why me? Why Derek? After 7 years. God, after 7 you sent Derek to me. Why this huge temptation? Where is my son? Where is my Derek? Olivet kept saying in tears, loudly. Mr. Daniel tried to hold himself. His charming prince was on the verge of death, and no one even knows where he is. He held his wife and tried consoling her. Olivet refused to go home. She wanted her son to be brought back to her. The headmistress and the teacher couldn't go home either. They just looked at the couple, who were in so much pain and couldn't stop their tears from flowing. It was getting dark already, and they needed to go back home. Mr. Daniel convinced his wife to follow him back home. The headmistress begged Mr. Daniel not to take out his anger on their school, as they will put their hands together in looking for Derek. Mr. Daniel wasn't in the mood to start causing havoc. He just wanted to take his wife home. Going after the school was not going to bring back his son. He blamed himself and hoped the man bring back his son alive to them. Mr. Solomon was speeding a lot, and when he was stopped by the police, he showed them the written report by the doctor coupled with the notes. They let him pass. He drove up for hours and finally got to his city. It was already dark, but he drove straight to He gave them the notes the doctor had given him. Derek was quickly taken into the theater, while Mr. Solomon made the necessary payments. The surgeon was called, and luckily he was still in the hospital, though he had wanted to leave a while ago. But it was as if something kept holding him back. He immediately went in to see Derek. Mr. Solomon was in the waiting room. He was praying and hoping Derek would come out safe. He kept pacing right around and rubbing his hands together on his head. His phone kept vibrating in his pocket, so he brought it out, and it was his wife, Teresa, calling. She had called him so many times and he never picked. He picked up the call, and his wife asked him why he wasn't back home. After telling her hours ago that he was on his way, Mr. Solomon explained everything to his wife. She asked where he was so she could come immediately. It took a few minutes, but Teresa arrived at the hospital. She went and met her husband where he was seated and sweating. She asked him how it all happened, and he told her. Teresa was so concerned she decided to wait with her husband for the outcome of the surgery. The surgery took a very long time. Once in a while, a nurse would come out and then go back into the theater. Mr. Solomon and Teresa kept sleeping and waking up at intervals in the hospital waiting room. They earnestly wanted Derek to be healed. Finally, the doctor came out. He was wearing a smile on his face. Mr. Solomon was the first to see the doctor. He tried standing up, and Tina, who was sitting beside him, woke up too. Doctor, how is he? Hope the surgery was successful. Mr. Solomon asked the doctor anxiously. Yes, the surgery was successful. Oh, thank God, Mr. Solomon said out loud, while his wife hugged him happily. Please bring down your voices, the doctor said in a low tone. Okay, Mr. Solomon said. He needs a lot of resting time. He's likely to lose a part of his memory, which will only come back with time, by God's grace. Also, he may not be able to talk well for a while. I have given some list of drugs to the nurses. You get them and make sure he takes them as prescribed. He really needs a lot of love and care for him to get well soon. Can we see him now? Teresa asked softly. Sure, but he needs no disturbance. He needs maximum rest, the doctor said, and walked out. The couple thanked the doctor and walked into the hospital room. Immediately, Teresa walked into the room and set her eyes on Derek. Streams of tears rolled down her cheek. She started sobbing bitterly. while Mr. Solomon tried to console her. The headmistress left with a heavy heart. She knew Derek was the only child of Mr. Daniel. She knows what it feels like for a child to be missing. She blamed the teacher in charge of his class for being careless. The teacher wanted to defend herself, but she knew that nothing she would say would justify the fact that Derek got missing under her watch. She only prayed and hoped for Derek to be safe wherever he was. Mr. Daniel stopped, which would take him and his wife back home. He kept consoling her as they drove back home together. When they got home, Mr. Daniel began to make calls, creating awareness that his son was missing. He wanted to go to the police station, but he couldn't leave his wife all alone in the condition she was in. Olivet sat down in the chair in the living room. She felt like she had lost a part of herself. She wondered why such a heavy temptation would come to her. She couldn't blame her husband. She knew it wasn't on his side. But she wondered why of all days it should be the day that traffic would hold her up. If only there was no traffic, she might have gotten to school before Derek had the accident. Oliver stood up slowly. Then she walked towards the room in slow steps. After wiping her tears, "Where are you going to?" her husband asked her, looking at his wife. Oliver just shook her head from left to right and kept walking towards her room. She entered her room and knelt down beside her bed. "Father, I know you won't let anything happen to the only child you have given me. I know you will heal him, even though he's not here with me, wherever hospital he is, or he has been taken to. Let him be healed, because I trust in you, Lord, in the name of Jesus. Amen." Mr. Daniel responded proudly. Oliver turned and looked at him. He had followed her into the room. Mr. Daniel consoled his wife, and they had no appetite for food. He took his wife to the bathroom and helped her take a shower. After they were done, they retired to bed. They both couldn't sleep, as a lot of questions kept running through their mind. Who had taken Derek? Why did he leave for another city with Derek without their consent? Was Derek really safe? How would they get to see their only son? Teresa started sobbing bitterly as she saw the condition of Derek. Mr. Solomon held his wife and took her out of the room, and the doctor had warned them not to disturb Derek to avoid any complication. Years ago, Mr. Solomon got married to Teresa. She got pregnant for the first time, and the couples were happy for their incoming child. It took a few weeks and Teresa had a miscarriage. She cried because she couldn't tell what caused the miscarriage. And then she took in again after some months. This time, she tried being very careful and avoided everything the doctor had told her to avoid. Finally, she gave birth to a very handsome baby boy. They were very happy and they called their little boy Martins. After the birth of Martins, the doctor had come to give them a sad news that Teresa won't be able to take in anymore due to some complications she had during delivery. The couples were not worried because they had gotten a son and they never wanted many children in the first place. Martins grew into a very smart child. He was admired by many because of how intelligent he was. He became the pride of his parents. But when Martins was 10, he fell sick and was taken to the hospital for treatment. And after some treatment, he got better. After a week, he got sick again. He was once again taken to the same hospital and he got better. It suddenly became a habit for Martins to fall sick after every week. It didn't bother Mr. Solomon and Teresa because they had so much money to buy drugs for their son. Martins then began to lose weight and his sickness became so serious. That was when Teresa suggested that they should change to another hospital. Mr. Solomon agreed and Martins was taken to another hospital. When they got to the hospital, a doctor was called because of how serious Martins' case was. After much checkup and examination, the doctor called the couples into his office, leaving Martins lying on the hospital bed. The doctor told them that their son had leukemia, that is cancer of the blood. He told them that leukemia was controllable and treatable in children, but Martins' case has reached its peak and he will die at any moment. He advised them to go and spend their last moment with their son. His wife cried her eyes out in the doctor's office. Then she went with her husband to go and see her son. When they arrived, Martins was just staring at his parents, his eyes partly opened, and the couple tried their best to hide their tears. Martins smiled at his mother while holding her hands tightly. Suddenly, she could feel Martin's grip loosen up. She looked at her son and realized that he was gone. She shook him vigorously, trying to wake him up, but he was really gone. His father stood looking at his son, and tears rolled down his cheek. Why? Teresa hugged her son, crying her eyes out. Looking at Derek with bandages made Teresa remember how her son had given up the ghost on a hospital bed. While smiling at her, who knows if he's the only child of his parents, just like us? How will they cope without their son? Teresa asked her husband in tears. Tomorrow morning, I will go back and look for his parents using the name on the school uniform, Mr. Solomon said, still consoling his wife. The next morning, Mr. Daniel woke up. He sat on his bed thinking of how he was going to find his only son. He decided he was going to go to the police station and lay a complaint about his missing son. A call came through his phone. It was from the proprietor of the school. She was calling to plead for forgiveness and promise him that the school was going to help and make sure Derek was brought back to him. Mr. Daniel knew that those words only came because she was afraid of losing her school. He only wanted his son to be found and nothing more. So he left for the police station to lay a complaint about his missing son. The police assured Mr. Daniel that they would try their best to bring his son back to him. By the time Mr. Daniel came back from the police station, he wanted to go to work, but on a second thought, he decided to go back home and be with his wife. He got back home and discovered that the door was open. He had asked Oliver to shut the door. Back at the hospital, Mr. Solomon went back to where Derek was lying with his wife Teresa. He hadn't moved ever since the surgery was done. He laid still with the white clothes he was changed into, and the bandages on his head had a slight stain of blood. The couple on an empty bed opposite where Derek laid. He's so handsome and adorable, Teresa said, hugging her husband as they stared at Derek. His parents must be so lucky to have him. Thank God the operation was successful, Mr. Solomon said with a smile. He looked at his watch and the time was 2 minutes past 1 a.m. I think you need to go back home and rest, my dear. You have to be at work early, remember? Mr. Solomon said to his wife. She tapped her phone and saw that it was early morning already. She told her husband that she wouldn't be able to find sleep if she went back to the house. Mr. Solomon tried to persuade his wife, but she wanted to stay with him and Derek. He felt the way Teresa just kept staring at Derek with so much love. As time went by, Miss Teresa slept off on her husband's lap. The reflection of the early morning sun found its way into the room, where the noises of people moving around in the hospital woke them up. They were tired. The first thing they did was to check up on Derek. He was still sleeping and had not yet opened his eyes. Mr. Solomon left the room and went to get the nurse that was attending to Derek. He asked for the uniform that Derek was putting on earlier. Before he had his clothes changed, the nurse gave the uniform to Mr. Solomon. He went outside and placed the uniform perfectly at the back of his seat. After staring at Derek for a while, Teresa left the hospital room. She was already running late for work. She left Mr. Solomon in the hospital and left for their house. Mr. Solomon gave the nurse some tea and asked her to look after Derek. Then he left the hospital and went towards his car. Something surprising happened. Mr. Solomon had 2 flat tires. He never noticed it when he came to keep Derek's uniform. And he had just 1 tire, so he decided to walk down the road to get help from the mechanic that was nearby. Few minutes later, Mr. Solomon came back with someone and his tires were changed. It was time for him to travel to the city where he had knocked down Derek to look for his parents. As Mr. Solomon approached the city, something strange happened. He turned to pick up the uniform which he had placed perfectly at the back of his car. But to his greatest surprise, the uniform wasn't there anymore. Mr. Solomon stepped on his brakes and immediately parked his car and decided to come out of the car and search for the uniform very well. He searched for the uniform, but it was nowhere to be found. Who do you think hid Derrick's uniform? Do you think Teresa would want Derrick to his biological parents? What do you think will be Teresa's ulterior motive? We will find out in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching, and please do not forget to subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this story, give it a thumbs up, comment and share. Thank you and God bless you.